Hello, my name is Catherine Russell Brown, and I'm excited to talk to you today and tell you about my new book, Justice Rising: 12 Amazing Black Women in the Civil Rights Movement. I'm excited to read stories about these women and about civil rights marches because this was an exciting and important time in American history. The US civil rights movement took place during the 1950s and 60s. It was a time of great upheaval, protest, and change. Thousands of Black people, mostly from the American South, were determined to fight for equality and justice. Black women were the backbone of the civil rights movement. They knew that every person could do something, big or small, to create a better world. Some of the women organized marches, others wrote letters to protest segregation, and some arranged meetings to discuss voting rights. Some of them believed so strongly in racial justice that they quit their jobs, moved away from home, and some left school to join the civil rights movement. Even though Black women did the majority of the work, most of them didn't receive credit for their contributions. Justice Rising includes the stories of 12 sheroes, women heroes of the civil rights movement. Each woman played her own special part, no matter how hard the road was to achieve racial equality. These women kept fighting for justice. I'm excited to read the stories and have you take a look at the beautiful artwork and illustrations of Kim Holt. Let's start with the first story, and that is Ella Baker, who was from Norfolk, Virginia. Growing up, Ella saw that women had the power to change the world. She watched her mother work with other women to teach and help people. Like her mother, Ella wasn't afraid to speak her mind. After college, she joined different groups to help women and Black people gain rights. She knew how to organize people to work for justice. Ella was successful because she listened when people talked, and she cared about everyday folks. In the 1960s, when students started sit-ins at lunch counters, Ella met with student leaders. She realized that young people needed a bigger voice in the civil rights movement. She helped start the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Ella is revered as the mother of the civil rights movement. Ruby Bridges from Tylertown, Mississippi. First grade. Ruby was excited to begin school. Each day, tall men wearing suits with badges walked with her to the schoolhouse door. Ruby and the men passed by large crowds of people who hollered threats and carried signs telling her to go home. They didn't want her to integrate the school. Ruby hugged her books tight, held her head high, and walked ahead. Inside the building, Ruby felt safe. She had her very own teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other students in the classroom because white parents didn't want their children in school with a Black child. Just by going to school, 6-year-old Ruby made a difference. Sometimes doing something ordinary can change the world. Claudette Colvin from Montgomery, Alabama. On the day that she made history, Claudette was heading home from high school on the number 64 bus. When the driver saw a white woman standing and Black riders sitting, he ordered Claudette to move to the back. She sat as still as a statue. The police were called and dragged Claudette off the bus and took her to jail. She became scared when she heard the jangle of keys lock the door to her tiny cell. While she waited for her mother, she recited the Lord's Prayer. Claudette hadn't planned her bus sit-in. She did it because she knew segregation was wrong and injustice upset her soul. Claudette's actions stirred others to act. 9 months later, when a bus driver demanded that Rosa Parks stand up and move to the back, she thought about Claudette and stayed in her seat. Dorothy Cotton from Goldsboro, North Carolina. There's your ready girl. That's how Miss Gray described Dorothy, her star English student. Whatever the task, Dorothy was prepared. Growing up, it bothered Dorothy that Black people couldn't use the public library. When she became a civil rights activist, Dorothy worked to make the laws fair. After hearing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. give a speech, she moved to Atlanta to lead the Citizen Education Program. The program taught thousands of Black people how to read, write, and register to vote. Dorothy became the only woman to serve on Dr. King's leadership team. She knew how to organize people and get things done. She helped plan the Children's Crusade and the St. Augustine March. Dorothy was always ready to work for justice. Fannie Lou Hamer from Montgomery County, Mississippi. Young Fannie Lou loved school, but she had to quit after 6th grade to help her family. They needed Fannie Lou, the youngest of 20 children, to help pick cotton. It was especially tough work for Fannie Lou, who suffered polio when she was 6. Years later, at age 44, Fannie Lou learned that Black people had voting rights. When her boss heard that she planned to vote, he fired Fannie Lou and forced her off his plantation. Fannie Lou then joined the civil rights movement and registered Black voters in the Mississippi Delta. Her mesmerizing speeches encouraged people to take action. Some people tried to stop her from protesting. She was arrested, put in jail, and beaten many times. When Fannie Lou was released, she continued to fight for fair treatment. Fannie Lou's mission was to make sure everyone of age could vote. Coretta Scott King from Heiberger, Alabama. Coretta's family knew firsthand that some people hated others based on the color of their skin. Coretta learned early that no matter what happened, she had to keep pushing forward. At age 10, Coretta and her sister picked cotton in the hot sun to pay for school. In college, Coretta worked with civil rights groups. She spoke up when she saw injustice. When she married Martin Luther King Jr., they became civil rights partners. Coretta helped plan events and performed freedom concerts to raise money. After Martin was killed, Coretta's heart was heavy, but she continued to speak against war and poverty. She built the Center for Nonviolence and organized a holiday for Dr. King. Coretta knew the fight for justice would be long, so she kept fighting. Diane Nash, Chicago, Illinois. Diane was 21 when she moved to Nashville for college. Everywhere she looked, there were whites only and coloreds only signs. She was furious. Jim Crow laws made it legal to treat people differently based on their skin color. They made the world small for Black people. She had to do something. Diane studied how to use nonviolence to fight for equality and become a peace activist. Diane was arrested many times for organizing civil rights marches and sit-ins. She was even arrested when she was 6 months pregnant. The judge sentenced her to 10 days in jail. To show that segregation was wrong, Diane helped organize freedom riders. Hundreds of Black and white students rode together on buses traveling through the Deep South. The riders were attacked by violent mobs. Still, Diane refused to let that stop the freedom riders. Diane believed that peaceful protest was the only answer to violence. Rosa Parks from Tuskegee, Alabama. 10-year-old Rosa didn't let anybody treat her like a second-class citizen. When she was bullied by a white boy, she threatened him with a rock. She was raised to have pride. As an adult, Rosa joined groups pushing for equal rights. She especially wanted a fair world for Black women. Rosa was determined to vote, even though the rules weren't fair. Black people had to take a test and white people didn't. Rosa took the test again and again until finally she passed on her third try. Segregation made Rosa feel sad. One day, on her bus ride home, she refused to move to let a white man sit down. Rosa's arrest was news around the world and sparked a year-long bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa fought for civil rights every day of her life. Bernice Johnson Reagan, Dougherty County, Georgia. Bernice was a preacher's daughter who started singing when she was little. Growing up, she sang in the church choir and all through school. When a piano wasn't available, the choir sang a cappella. Bernice preferred that sound, just voices. In college, Bernice joined with students who wanted equality. Whenever they marched at churches, police stations, and courthouses, they sang freedom songs. Bernice was the song leader. She knew dozens of songs and always picked the right one to energize or calm down the crowd. Bernice was expelled from college for protesting, so she enrolled at another school and kept on singing for justice. Gloria Richardson from Baltimore, Maryland. They called her Glorious Gloria. Some said she was a modern-day Harriet Tubman. In the same county where Tubman had been enslaved, Gloria planned demonstrations to demand jobs and schools for Black people. Gloria was fierce. At one march, when a National Guardsman pointed his bayonet at her, she pushed it away. In 1963, after months of protests and unrest, the Treaty of Cambridge was signed, an agreement between Gloria's organization, the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee, and the city of Cambridge, Maryland. Gloria's work helped to desegregate the city and pushed Congress to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Joanne Robinson from Aloud, Georgia. Joanne Robinson had a troubling experience riding the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. When the driver saw that Joanne wasn't sitting in the back, he screamed at her and kicked her off the nearly empty bus. Tears rolled down her face. A year later, Joanne became president of the Women's Political Council. She demanded that bus drivers stop bullying Black riders and fought against unfair seating rules. When Rosa Parks was arrested in 1955, Joanne's group was ready. Overnight, they printed thousands of flyers encouraging Black people to stop riding segregated buses. For 13 months, thousands of Black people walked and shared rides during the Montgomery bus boycott, until finally the Supreme Court ruled segregation on buses was unconstitutional. Joanne was a leader in the civil rights movement's most successful boycott. Cheyenne Webb from Selma, Alabama. On her walk to school one morning, 8-year-old Cheyenne saw Black and white people talking in front of Brown Chapel AME. For Selma in 1965, this was a strange sight. Curious, Cheyenne went inside and sat down. For 5 hours, speakers talked about voting rights for Black people. At home, Cheyenne told Mama what she'd learned. If you can't vote, you're not free. Cheyenne continued to skip school and attend meetings. When Dr. King visited the church, she met him. In 1965, civil rights leaders planned the Selma to Montgomery March to support voting rights. Cheyenne was determined to be there. At the march, police attacked protesters with nightsticks and tear gas. Cheyenne ran home as fast as she could. Tear gas burned her eyes. She was so scared that night, she wrote her obituary. Dr. King called Cheyenne the smallest freedom fighter. Freedom marchers. A movement wouldn't be a movement without public protest marches. Marches were held in front of courthouses, monuments, and jails. The marchers walked, carried signs, sang songs, and demanded positive change. Black women worked tirelessly on the front lines and behind the scenes to make sure the civil rights marches were successful. They did whatever had to be done. They wrote speeches, cooked food, passed out flyers, made phone calls. Civil rights marches made news around the world. Everyone heard about the March on Washington, the Selma to Montgomery March, and the Children's Crusade. These Black women and the people they inspired worked to ensure justice for all. I hope you enjoyed hearing and learning about some Black women civil rights movement workers who did their part to work for justice and equality for everybody. And I hope that you will be interested in some of these women and young people and find out a little bit more information about them. And in the back of the book, there are some quotes, some things that these women have said that are inspirational. And then there are some sources, a list of some places where there's more information about them. And I hope you've enjoyed these stories.